It's Tim's Vinyl Confessions. I'm Tim Durling. So glad to have you tuning in for another episode. On this one, I go through my Bryan Adams CD collection. A lot of these are big albums. A lot of them are albums that I think deserve a little talking about. Even some of the big ones don't get the sort of the credit they deserve for being, I'm going to say, influential. First couple Bryan Adams albums weren't that successful. I happen to really like them. So I'm going to get into my copies of the CDs that I have. Now, my collection is not complete. I'm missing a few latter-day ones. My favorite Bryan Adams stuff tends to come from the 80s, but he's done good stuff throughout his career, in my opinion. But we'll get started with his first album, which came out in 1980. A lot of these songs ended up recorded by other artists. That's been the case throughout his career, actually. Self-titled, and this is an issue that was done in Canada on A&M. One of very few artists that's pretty much been with the same record label throughout his career. And this is very young Bryan Adams, very, sounds like a kid. I mean, he kind of was. He was 21 when he did this. And some great songs on here, like Remember, Hiding from Love, State of Mind. There's some good songs on here, and no one ever talks about this first album. I put it on once in a while. I can get a kick out of it. Not much inside of it. Wasn't much inside the record. 1 year made a big difference in a lot of ways. I'm not sure why, but all of a sudden, I think people on the industry side of things started to realize this kid was a force to be reckoned with, and a commercial force in years to come. His second album, You Want It, You Got It, came out in 1981. Now, trying to be have some humor, his first album was not successful, so he wanted to call this album Bryan Adams Hasn't Heard of You Either. But thought that might have been a little bit, it's a little, kind of like a little punk, a little snotty. Didn't really fit what he was trying to do, so this is the album cover. And this is a U.S. edition on A&M, which is actually a BMG music service version. So everything would look the same retail except for this bar right here. This is the first album that he produced with Bob Clearmountain, and it's got that classic Bryan Adams sound. Not all the songs are quite there yet, but he was working on Lonely Nights. That was a minor chart entry off this one. Fits You Good's a good song. Jealousy. Good stuff on this one, too. Now, this copy I bought used, someone named Crane, wrote his name all over it. Thankfully, wrote it on the right side, not the side that plays, the side that counts. But again, these are albums that you never see, and you don't see the remastered versions of them either, unless you go like with Japanese imports. So a little bit of credits in there. Sometimes you can pick examples in history where it's an artist's third album that does it for them. And that was definitely the case with Bryan Adams. His third album came out in 1983, made him a star. Cuts Like a Knife. And this is the Canadian edition on A&M. This one had, of course, the title song, his first top 10 single, Straight from the Heart. This Time was another top 40 single. It also contains the original version of a song that would become a hit for him later on with I'm Ready. There's the CD itself. And a little bit more inside of this album this time around. Lyrics and all the credits. As a Kiss fan, this is the first time I realized that the song Don't Leave Me Lonely was co-written by late Kiss drummer Eric Carr. I knew that Bryan Adams and Jim Vallance had co-written War Machine and Rock and Roll Hell on Creatures of the Night, two of my favorite Kiss songs. Heavy and catchy at the same time, which is kind of the point. Also, he co-wrote Down on Your Knees from the Killers album. Of course, everything changed. The reason that he became a household name happened. It was actually on his 25th birthday, as the story goes. In 1984 was the release of this album, Reckless. This is practically a greatest hits album unto itself. It was the era of the mega album. Michael Jackson's Thriller, Prince, Purple Rain, Springsteen, Born in the USA, and on the harder rocking front you had Def Leppard, Hysteria, an album that came out and had multiple hit singles from the same album. And this is the one that did it for him. This copy I've got here is an early U.S. pressing. Over half this album was not only a single, but a hit single. Pretty unheard of. Just had the right songs at the right time. And what I think is cool about Bryan Adams, he's always posted not just pictures of himself, but pictures of his band, whoever he was playing with at the time. I thought that was kind of classy. Not to mention Jim Vallance, I mean, this co-writer. songwriters that don't play instruments tend not to get credit on their albums. I don't have much for deluxe versions here, but I did make an exception when the 30th anniversary of Reckless came out in 2014. Picked up the double, well, it's actually, no, it's 2 CDs. So this came out from Universal, which absorbed A&M. So this is how prolific Adams and Valance were at this time. So disc 1 is the album proper, first 10 songs. Then, from tracks 11 to 17, all songs that were written for the album, not used. And almost every one of these songs, I can tell you, were recorded by somebody else. So Let Me Down Easy, Roger Daltrey recorded that song. Teacher, Teacher, of course, was a pretty big hit single for 38 Special. Boys Night Out, slightly different, but Crocus recorded that song. Draw the Line was recorded by Ted Nugent when he had Brian Howe, who would later sing for Bad Company, singing for him, and also Paul Dean of Loverboy put that on his first solo album. Loverboy also recorded an early Adams Valance composition called Jump on the Get Lucky album. May come into play later. Play to Win was originally done by a group called Fast Forward on a soundtrack, I think it was to the movie Perfect. I think. That's the one. The Health Club movie with Jamie Lee Curtis, John Travolta. I could be wrong about that. Too Hot to Handle, I don't know if anybody else recorded that. They probably did. But Reckless, I mean, this album almost had a title song, but it didn't. Now, Loverboy took this song intact and changed Reckless to Dangerous and recorded it for their Lovin' Every Minute of It album. It's the exact same song. They just changed the title. Actually, the way that they sang it was a 3-syllable word. It sings better if you know the song. So, all the original packaging that would have come with the record comes with this. It also comes with a second disc that was recorded at the Hammersmith Odeon in April '85 for BBC Live in Concert. What I like about this one is that he reaches way back. He does songs like Tonight, Lonely Nights, Remember. So he pays attention to those first couple of albums. But if you've got the regular version of Reckless, you're a big fan of that album, it's worth picking up this deluxe version to hear these other songs. I was mainly curious to hear his version of Teacher, Teacher, and I'm thinking that the 38 Special band heard the demo and just learned it because it's almost identical. It's very, very cool stuff. There's a cool write-up, lots of pictures, talks about the making of this album. And what's cool about this now, that's actually a color photo. It's not exactly the photo that was on the front cover. It's obviously from the same photo session. So with a big album, of course, comes pressure to follow it up. And the follow-up didn't come for 3 years later, which is a long time in the 80s. 1987, the follow-up to Reckless finally came out, Into the Fire. Now, I think this is a fine album, but it had the misfortune of coming off the heels of a blockbuster. Also, Bryan Adams and Jim Valance wanted to write not so many relationship-type songs. He'd been on the Amnesty International tour with the likes of Sting and Peter Gabriel and U2, kind of get that world-conscious thing going on, and wanted to write some more serious songs lyrically. Musically, it didn't change all that much. And he still managed to have a top 10 single with Heat of the Night, great song, and one of my favorites of his that sort of gets overlooked because he's got so many hits, Hearts on Fire, which is actually was written for and sounds more like it would have belonged on Reckless. Now, this copy I have is a U.S. edition, again on A&M Records. And I put it in a new case, but you can see that this was actually a cutout album because they pressed more copies of this than sold. So it's kind of the ridiculousness of the music business. Even though it probably sold 3 million copies, all told, it was considered a failure. And I've never understood that. How can something that sells millions of copies be considered a failure? But it happened. It's happened to Def Leppard. It happened to Bon Jovi. Anybody that has that huge blockbuster success. So I've seen cuts in CDs and records and cassettes before. I've never seen one this deep. It's almost into the disc itself. Look how far in that reaches. That is nuts. So all black and white photos inside of this and all the lyrics. And Into the Fire is a good album. It deserves. It's an album that if you're honestly, you hear a lot of these songs on the radio. But if you want to hear songs like that you don't hear all the time, Into the Fire is your album to get. Next up is an album that, for a Canadian artist, surprisingly, who was quite big, didn't come out in his home country for 6 years. So in 1988 in Europe, this album came out, and Japan and some other territories. Live, Live, Live. This was recorded on the Into the Fire tour. Eventually saw the light domestic release in late 1994, but it's got a copyright date of 1988 on it. This is a great concert. That's probably from several concerts, but it's got a good lineup of songs. Bryan sings great on this album. There's a couple covers on here just for fun. Walking After Midnight, I Fought the Law. And Much Music played a video that came off this, even though this album didn't come out officially. The last track, Into the Fire, title song from the album of the same name, but that was a full band version. This is just him and a guitar, and it's very cool. There's the disc itself. And a little bit of write-up about the shows. Again, pictures of the band members. What I think is kind of cool, it says original versions can be found on the following records. And it's got So Far So Good, his first greatest hits album, listed here, which wasn't out when this originally came out. But it's true, they are on that. Original versions can be found there. So it was another 4 years in between studio albums, and that's a long time. So by now he and Jim Vallance had kind of parted ways, at least for a few years. They'd been working together for 10 years straight, and he found another co-collaborator, a guy by the name of Mutt Lange. And, you know, I remember reading about that, so that's kind of strange. At the time, it seemed strange to me. So it was a long time before the new Bryan Adams album came out. And it came out in the fall of 1991, Waking Up the Neighbors. This was another big, big album. I mean, you know, if Into the Fire was a dip in sales, this made sure that the sales came back. It was preceded, of course, by a song that just, you know, took over the universe for a while. Everything I Do, Do It For You, from the Robin Hood Prince Thief soundtrack. His first real full-on ballad that wasn't even like a rock ballad, although it kind of was. Not exactly the rocking return that somebody like me, who, you know, was used to lead off singles like Run, Dear, or Heat of the Night, was used to. But man, oh man, was that song huge. #1 for something like 7 weeks. So then, when the album came out, the single that came out with it was Can't Stop This Thing We Started, and that's like, okay, it sounds like Def Leppard. And when I say that, a lot of that's Mutt Lange. A lot of that Def Leppard sound is Mutt Lange, and you can hear it on a lot of the tracks on this album. This had a lot of hit singles on it. I think it suffers from the CD syndrome, where the bands and artists or groups thought that they had to fill up every square inch of space with songs. There are 15 tracks on here. They probably could have trimmed it back to 10, 11, maybe 12 songs on here, and it wouldn't be quite so bloated. But a lot of great tunes on here. Version I've got is a Canadian Columbia House version. This was a big album. I mean, there's not a lot needs to be said about it, other than the fact that he's pretty much got the same band, which I think is pretty cool. He's played with guitarist Keith Scott, drummer Mickey Curry, since the beginning of his career. And a lot of the guys have been there almost as long. Got some pictures inside of here from you know, various photo sessions. Yeah, this album really did well for him, obviously. So 1993, it was, I think, the right time for a best of. He'd amassed enough hit singles, so A&M puts this out. So Far So Good. I like the cover. It's a simple enough concept. And, of course, with a single disc, you're going to leave some songs off, but this is still pretty good. The final song on it, Please Forgive Me, was another power ballad. It was written for Waking Up the Neighbors, but there was an abundance of power ballads. They put it out here. It ended up being another hit single for him. This album sold a lot of copies, and the whole tire thing itself for the CD. This is a Canadian copy. Again, there's a picture of his band. And, you know, in the liner notes, it's always we, us. We'll see you again. See you on tour. Thanks for supporting us. You know, it's not a band, but he treats it like one. I think that's pretty classy, actually. So there's another little bit of a gap, again, before he released another full studio album. Another huge hit single in 1995 with Have You Ever Really Loved a Woman from the Don Juan DeMarco soundtrack. A departure, but another big hit. Now, I wish, and I still don't have it, I wish that there's a B-side of that single, was a song called Low Life. I wish he'd have put it on his next studio album, but it didn't. Maybe it'll turn up in a deluxe edition. So 1996, this album comes out, 18 Till I Die. It's a very 90s looking album, if not sounding. He's still working with Mutt Lange at this point. It was his last fairly big album. I think this went single platinum in the States. There's the disc itself. When I say it looks 90s, the photography style, it just looks 90s to me. I don't know how else to say it. Even down to the way the lyrics are presented. Kind of hard to read. So that album did all right for him. And there's some good rock tunes on here. Black Pearl comes to mind. It's kind of a cool song, We're Gonna Win. So 1997, like a lot of other artists, he put out an Unplugged album. This is a Canadian copy on A&M. You know, he and his band sound good live. It even gave him a couple of hit singles. Back to You was a brand new song recorded for this. And he did a stripped-down acoustic version of I'm Ready, which originally appeared on Cuts Like a Knife. Now, I like the original version, but the Unplugged version became a pretty big radio single for him. Order form for some merch here. And it's got all the lyrics to the songs, which I always find that strange, especially when they're older songs. The Unplugged album is one I'm pretty sure I've seen $5 bins, so it's worth picking up. Kind of prolific, 1998, a brand new studio album. It took me a while to get into this one, On a Day Like Today. Saw him live, well basically this would have been the newest studio album, and some of these songs like Don't Want to Live Forever, Come On, Come On, Come On, they sounded a lot better live and a lot more rockin'. This, I think it did alright in Canada. Had a lot of songs that got a lot of airplay, but overall I don't think it's one that gets listened to a lot these days. It's a Canadian Columbia House version of this. Oddly enough, for someone who, you know, was always based around Vancouver and Jim Vallance and all of that, he'd never recorded an album with the Bruce Fairbairn Bob Rock production team, like as Loverboy did, and Prism and Honeymoon Suite, and then later Bon Jovi and Aerosmith, and on and on and on. This album actually was produced by Bob Rock, even though it's not remotely heavy. Not that Bob Rock only produces heavy albums. There's pictures and all the lyrics inside of here. Bunch of guitars. So yeah, most of the songs in here produced by Bob Rock anyway, not all of them. So, missing a couple things. The next thing I've got, 2004, Room Service. He actually recorded this on tour in his hotel room, so it's literally the Room Service album. It's recorded on the road. This has some good stuff on it. I really like the song Open Road. That was the first single off of this one. Stylized printing there. It's like hashtags before hashtags existed. There's no gaps in between the words. Got this from Columbia House. It was Columbia House. I was only in the Columbia House for about 15 years. 2008, I quit altogether, and I don't know how much longer they lasted after that. But it would take forever for them to get albums in, and sometimes they never would. So all the lyrics to all the songs, with this strat there that says Room Service right on it. Some spray paint. I think the idea was to make it look, you know, we did this in a hurry. Another band photo, still featuring these guys in the band. 2005, if anybody out there always kind of like some of Bryan Adams' songs, or a lot of them, and wanted to buy one thing, even though there's something brand new that's out there, I would still recommend this. This came out in 2005. It's just called Anthology. A 2-disc set on A&M Records. This is a Canadian edition. And this is a pretty comprehensive look at his career from 1980 all the way to 2005. You know, there's things on here like All for Love, the song with Sting and Rod Stewart from the Three Musketeers soundtrack. That never appeared on one of his albums. Rocksteady with Bonnie Raitt, that's on here. A couple of remixes. Disc 1, of course, is the one that I usually reach for, but it's good. It's funny, there's a little ad in here for the Room Service album, and then a few others, a couple of DVDs that came out. I'm thinking that's outtakes from the Waking Up the Neighbors album cover. lengthy write-up. And surprisingly, there's some Dave Marsh from Rolling Stone, who rarely goes for commercial rock like that. So, kind of surprised by that. So, there's pretty detailed notes about each of the songs on here. And like I said, I think it's a really good track selection. So, it'd be something to seek out if you were looking to get something by Bryan Adams and you didn't necessarily want to get everything. I think this anthology would cover all the songs that you could possibly have heard. So in 2008, this album came out, 11, which, you know, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, no, what are we counting here? Anyway, in some count, it's his 11th album. This is a very unique looking, it's a European version. Thin Lizzy's Greatest Hits that I have looks like this too. It's almost rounded shaped. This one doesn't say A&M on it, it actually says Polydor, which really there's very little difference. It's all the same company. It's not one I reach for an awful lot. Nothing wrong with it. It's just a little bit mellow. And there were really no major hit singles off this either. Although I will say that I think it's with this album that he started collaborating with Jim Vallance again. Had a lot of different co-writers over the years. So in 2015, for the very first time, he teamed up with Jeff Lynne from ELO, Traveling Wilburys, and popped out, I think, a pretty cool little album. And I say a little album for a reason. It's called Get Up. This is a Canadian version. That says Polydor on it. It doesn't say A&M on it anymore. This sounds exactly what you might expect Bryan Adams and Jeff Lynne collaborating to sound like. It sounds kind of like a Traveling Wilburys or a Tom Petty album with Bryan Adams singing. It's just a fun little rock and roll record. Short, very short. There's 13 tracks on here, but there's actually only 9 new ones. So there's 9 songs, and there's acoustic versions of 4 songs from the album. I don't know why they did it that way, but this is a really fun little album to put on. I've had different people put it on, and people say, "What is that?" It's Bryan Adams. So yeah, Jeff Lynne, at this stage in the game, a new collaborator. It works very, very well. Lyrics and credits to everything in here. And the word is fun. I mean, I just keep coming back. It's just a fun little album. Not a lot of ballads on here. Just very bare bones. Well, that was the name of his acoustic album, which I don't have, but very dry produced album, but good. So 2017, another compilation came out, and you'd be forgiven if you saw it in a store and didn't realize it was Bryan Adams. It's called Ultimate. I will say this, it stands out in a record store rack. So he's got these sunglasses. Now this does say A&M on it. And this is a single disc compilation with 2 new songs on it, both of which are quite good. And it's a pretty comprehensive mix of his stuff over the years. Some of these songs are shortened to allow for 21 songs on a single CD. And this whole thing with the sunglasses continues throughout. But I gotta say, when I read the liner notes, I kind of got a chill as an old-time collector. I'm going to read this to you. When my record company, Polydor/Universal, asked me to put together the ultimate package, they indicated that 2018 might be the last year in history that CDs would be sold. I don't think so. Okay, I'll continue with this quote. I can remember people saying the same thing about vinyl, and it's still around, so I guess the jury's still out. So, even he's cognizant of the fact that, people don't tend to buy CDs anymore like they used to, but I certainly do, and I know I'm not alone out there, but I hope the label's wrong about that. So I think he thinks they are too. I've seen this on vinyl too, and like I said, it's very striking, a bright, bright orange. This isn't a definitive one. I mean, Cuts Like a Knife is as early as it gets on here, and that's the only track from that album, but it does hit most of the highlights. Like I said, I kind of prefer the Anthology. So that's a look at my Bryan Adams CD collection. Thanks for watching Tim's Vinyl Confessions.